Fallout has a very special place in my heart. There's nothing like prancing around a nuked Las Vegas strip, forming a gambling addiction at the ripe young age of 11 years old. Fallout is truly one of the most unique IPs out there. I mean, in what other game can you nuke an entire city within the first hour of booting up the game, and also get into a philosophical argument with a Roman LARPer?
It's Hegelian dialectics.
Its wacky, ultraviolet nature is what drew me in, and I've been hooked ever since. Bethesda has owned the franchise for just over 17 years now. Since then, we've had 4, for the most part, good games.
Somebody smell like shit.
A TV show, a mobile spinoff, and even real-life Nuka-Cola. The Toddster took this franchise from a cult classic CRPG to a renowned AAA household name IP. But is that for the betterment or the worsening of the franchise? Well, it's complicated. We've all heard the phrase at one point or another. Bethesda doesn't understand Fallout. Todd made Fallout suck. Bethesda doesn't get what made Fallout good. It's a talking point that's been done to death. From the deepest, just darkest depths of the Reddit forums to the rambling video essays of YouTube. But I mean, that's because there's some truth to it. They're still great games, don't get me wrong. They just don't capture that magic that the first 2 games have. They've stripped away some of the mature elements of the OG Fallout's writing and kind of just made it into like a first-person shooter, turning the dystopian, retro-futuristic punk aesthetic into a world where everyone is just for some reason obsessed with the 1950s. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. New Vegas was my first game in the Fallout franchise. There was just something so like grown-up-ish, like mature about it. Like the geopolitics of the wasteland, the moral ambiguity of how you choose to run New Vegas. It just had my little 12-year-old brain just thinking. Then when I went back and played Fallout 1 and 2, I was like, man, holy shit, man, these games are fucking sophisticated. They're dark, they're atmospheric, they're ultra-violent, they're super fucking gory, you know? It's great.
The darkness of the afterlife is all that awaits you now. May you find more peace in that world than you found in this one.
And then I went and I played Fallout 3.
Come on, you've got to wake up.
And I also had a fucking great time with it. It was completely different from the first 3 games I played. There was no desert aesthetic. We were in Washington, D.C. It had the piss filter on it. So, you know, as a newly bred diehard fan of the series, when I saw the reveal for Fallout 4, I was like, man, holy shit, I gotta be there day 1, right? But, you know, when I played it, 9th grade in high school, something just felt off about the game. You know, it didn't feel like Fallout.
He said it.
The Fallout games that I played before 4, you know, they were very dark, they were very gritty, you know, they were very mature. And I played Fallout 4 and it was like some, you know, happy-go-lucky first-person shooter, and everyone's wearing fucking hair curlers and eating apple pie. It was pretty much devoid of anything that made the first games and even 3 unique tonally. Even jumping from Fallout 3 to Fallout 4 just didn't feel right. The architecture was too bright and happy-go-lucky. So, you know, I thought to myself, Bethesda, they're not the best writers. So was this a result of their poor writing? Or was this just a misunderstanding of the Fallout universe? But before we can actually answer this question, we have to understand what Fallout is actually about. The iconic tagline of the series, "War never changes," is simple, but it's powerful. It's meant to serve as a warning, not just a declaration. It means that no matter of what era of human history that we're in, even after all of life is wiped out, you know, 99% of the population is wiped out, we're still bound to our ideals. We still carry our deepest primal instincts of greed, tribalism, and aggressiveness towards those we don't agree with. Those same instincts that caused us to be wiped out before are inevitably going to wipe us out again, no matter the tools of the trade. The USA of Fallout is infused with all these traits. The glimpses of pre-war America that we got in Fallout 1 and 2 were just fucking rough, you know? I mean, but it looks like it sucks to live in, you know? It wasn't this, you know, happy-go-lucky place where everything was all Gucci style and colorful and all the men wore suits and fedoras and all the women wore hair curlers. All of that was just a cultural front for a country that was deeply corrupt, lied to its citizens constantly, promoted rampant consumerism, and pretty much contributed to the end of the world. And, you know, I'm talking about all this pre-war nonsense because it leads me to my first problem with Bethesda's Fallout. They're just complete obsession with pre-war.
There is an expression in the wasteland, old world blues.
It refers to those so obsessed with the past they can't see the present, much less the future, for what it is.
They stare into the what was, eyes like pilot lights, guttering and spent, as the realities of their world continue on around them.
Not only do I think they failed to portray the pre-war America that Fallout 1 had established, but it almost seems like they actively celebrate it, showing a cozy, middle-class American Army veteran lifestyle that Todd Howard had as a headcanon of what USA and Fallout would look like. We play as a veteran of Anchorage who is just nothing but celebrated and lives in a typical middle-class suburbia that looks like it's the nuke town from Indiana Jones 4. There's a fundamental clash in the America that was represented in Fallout 1, 2, 3 in New Vegas and the America that was represented in Fallout 4. We're told that war never changes because war ultimately leads to peace. And to protect the peace of the world, war must be fought. In the intro movie to Fallout 4, it's almost like the military-industrial complex is a celebrated industry. And it's all wrong and it doesn't make any sense. It's not just a misunderstanding of the world Tim Kaine built, it's a misunderstanding of the phrase, war never changes, itself. But herein lies the problem with Bethesda in the pre-war. Even if they depicted it perfectly, even if they showed the fascist hellhole state that was America, it would still be misunderstanding the point of Fallout, because in Fallout, the past doesn't fucking matter. Fallout is not about restoring the world to the image of the pre-war. It isn't about how people felt in the midst of being in a war. And it isn't about the way people in the wasteland imagine the pre-war to be. It's about them surviving and building a new community within the carcass of one long forgotten. What matters is how people that even after an apocalypse is still making the same mistakes as they were before, following in the footsteps of the empires that killed themselves. The Brotherhood are just militaristic tech freaks that are obsessed with hoarding every piece of technology that they can find. The Master was completely convinced that the best option for the wasteland was eugenics, and once one person pushed back on his ideals with just logic, he just completely kills himself. The Enclave in Fallout 2 upped the ante on this, and literally tried to commit genocide on everyone in the wasteland.
Your little pussy belongs to me.
There's really no thought to how or why these factions exist, and only really serve to be shooting galleries for the protagonist. I mean, for God's sakes, when you ask Colonel Autumn why he wants the Purifier instead of the Brotherhood, he literally tells you you wouldn't understand.
Once this facility is operational, the masses will flock to the Enclave for fresh water, protection, and a plan for the future. I am sworn to protect the presidency. The chain of command must be upheld. I wouldn't expect you to understand.
Yeah, I won't, because your faction has nothing to stand for. Because Bethesda isn't good enough writers to have you stand for anything except to just be shot down by me. 2 dialogue options by Colonel Autumn completely dismantled the entire ideology of the Enclave in Fallout 3. The Enclave wants to wipe out everything that isn't pure and completely start over the wasteland. But in Fallout 3, they just want to pass clean water bottles out with Enclave labels slapped onto them. All because they just don't want the Brotherhood to. It's a complete mockery of the Enclave and everything they stood for in Fallout 2. You see, the thing about Fallout is, it's a post-apocalyptic setting, and the post-apocalypse sucks. But Fallout at its core is not how much the apocalypse sucks. Yeah, sure, you survive in a post-apocalyptic world, but that's not the point. The point is how societies and cultures rebuild in the midst of an apocalypse. The Hub is a safe trading town full of guards and merchants. They frequently trade water and have caravan routes, making them a sustainable community. Shady Sands is a small farming town full of peaceful people that have managed to become self-sustainable through agriculture. There's all different people with different types of ideals on how to run their community, from Aradesh to Killian. Even though the Great War only happened 80 years ago, people have moved on and started building communities of their own. Then you move on to Fallout 2, 80 years after Fallout 1. And now the world has completely moved on from the Great War. Bottle caps are replaced by real currency, minted by the New California Republic. Remember that little village Aradesh was building up? That's now an economic powerhouse, complete with its own army, turning Southern California into a secure, uniform state. There's cultural diversity in the form of tribal villages and sprawling cities with running water and actual electricity. Gambling and live entertainment are now prospering now that nobody has to worry about when their next cup of water is going to be. No one gives a shit about a war that happened 160 years ago, because them, their parents, or their grandparents weren't even alive to realize it. So everyone just lives their life like normal, because that's all they know. At Fallout 2's point of the timeline, Fallout 2 is more of like a post-apocalyptic game, and some may argue that that defeats the entire purpose of Fallout, as it's literally labeled a post-nuclear role-playing game. But I argue that showing the progression of civilization is the entire essence of Fallout. And without it, you're just another generic post-apocalyptic shooter.
No. Wait.
So in short, Fallout is about rebuilding. And I'll give Bethesda credit. They take these themes into account, but only at a very surface level. Oh, Fallout is about rebuilding? Oh, let's have the protagonist go scrounge up a fucking desk fan and some rotten out wood so he can build a shed for survivors to sleep in. War never changes? Oh, well, hell yeah, it doesn't. War never stops, so let's just keep making the Brotherhood fight the super mutants every game. Bethesda implements these mechanics into their games because they are themes of Fallout, but they never stop to think why they're implementing them. Sure, I mean, yeah, it's fun to play. It's really fun to build shitty ass shacks for settlers, and it's fun to blast super mutants all day. But it's a shallow interpretation of what the world of Fallout actually represents. The shallow interpretation of Fallout's universe directly ties into the aesthetic and world space being a far cry from what the original games had envisioned. Fallout has a very deep and a very needlessly complicated aesthetic attached to it. It's sort of a cosmic gumbo of 1920s Gothic Art Deco, 80s apocalyptic punk fashion, with a cultural backdrop of 1950s retrofuturism, set in the year 2077, where all technology revolves around nuclear power. Therefore, all inventions are looked at through the lens of atomic age engineering. Bethesda got rid of a lot of these aesthetics and decided to just focus in on one core aesthetic, the retrofuturism, and honestly, they can barely get that right too. Retrofuturism, by definition, is the use or a style of aesthetic that it was considered futuristic in an earlier era. This means a future envisioned by people of the past. Bethesda has this flipped around though. Bethesda seems to think that retrofuturism is a future obsessed with the past. There's no extrapolation on the idea of a retrofuturistic atomic age culture. This 2077 was envisioned by the 1950s, and technology diverged in the 1950s. Therefore, culture, music, fashion, and entertainment all has to completely stop in time in the 1950s? It's a reductive way of looking at retrofuturism. The world ended 120 years after the atomic age, but for some reason everyone's still wearing leather jackets and they're greasing their hair up into pompadours. It's not just a misrepresentation of Fallout's world, it's a misunderstanding of retrofuturism itself. Blade Runner, though not considered retrofuturistic at the time, became a great example of what retrofuturism can be. There's a completely futuristic world, but the film is still tied to the fact that the future was envisioned by someone in 1981 because they used cassette tapes, CRTVs, and phone booths. We don't look at what was aesthetic back in the day, slap some sci-fi onto it, and call it a day. Yet that's exactly what Bethesda Fallout does. I'm not saying the 1950s styling is a bad idea, because it's what makes Fallout one of the most unique IPs out right now. I'm just saying that it's overdone to the point where it overshadows everything else about the aesthetic of Fallout. Bethesda's understanding of Fallout's aesthetic is completely superficial. They've reduced the look and feel down to the elevator pitch of, what if it was in the future? But it looked like the 1950s, but it was post-apocalyptic. And honestly, that's not a bad premise. That's actually a very good premise. It's just not Fallout's premise. If you look at Fallout 4 on an island, the game looks pretty damn cool. But when you compare it to Fallout 1, it looks like a completely different game. No Fallout before Fallout 4 explicitly showed anything from the pre-war, so you kind of just had to glean the information from little bits and pieces from the games. And the world back then seemed mysterious and infinitely more interesting because of it. I mean, let's look at the intro movie for Fallout 1, for example. It starts with propaganda for the annexation of Canada, just showing how corrupt the army is for Fallout 1. And this is within the first 10 seconds. Then you zoom out a little bit and see in black and white tube TV, reminiscent of that 1950s technology we talked about. Then you zoom out even further, and you see a torn city skyline that looks like Gotham City from 1989's Batman if you dropped a nuke on it. The architecture wasn't this Jetsons Gucci nonsense that you see in Fallout 4. It was looked like if you took the 1927 movie Metropolis, you slapped a gothic horror filter over it, and then you dropped a bomb on it. You notice how bleak the world looks. The massive brooding iron statues and faces that are on the side of every building. There was a contrast of styles that formed into a dystopian society unlike anything else. I'll even give Fallout 3 credit. Like, the architecture is completely in line with what the original Fallout looked like. They had the giant faces, you know, the giant iron buildings, the Art Deco architecture with the piss filter over it. Like, it was all there. It was really good. Now compare that to the launch trailer we see in Fallout 4. The only thing placing it in the future is Codsworth. There's no extrapolation on the architecture. There's no advancement in the fashion. The kids are riding 50s bicycles and have pinstripe shirts. Not only does it kill all the mystery surrounding pre-war America, but it just completely jumps the shark on making everything as 50s as it can possibly be. It's not that Bethesda just emphasizes the 1950s themes of Fallout, they're literally obsessed with it. Any chance they get to display the pre-war looking like Nuketown from Black Ops 1, they'll take it. Their obsession with showing way too much of the pre-war era and their emphasis on how society came to a screeching halt after the 1950s really mirrors the cultural stagnation that the Wasteland has in their games as well. A world where after 219 years, society just completely refuses to progress. We're expected to believe that after 219 years, society still hasn't progressed. Besides people living in shanty towns, there's still no formal governments, and everyone is still blaming their life sucking on the apocalypse.
Please, do you have any water? I'm so thirsty.
Bethesda doesn't understand the themes of Fallout, and because of that, everything is stuck in this 1950s time loop, and because of that, culture doesn't progress at all, no matter how much time passes in the games. For how fun Fallout 4's build mode is, it really bites itself in the ass thematically.
Yeah, we need beds. Yeah, we need water. Mama Murphy needs crack.
Everyone looks like a lazy bum compared to the Sole Survivor, because for some reason they've just been sleeping next to rotting skeletons, and the Sole Survivor has to be the one to say, hey, fucking pick that shit up, dude. I mean, in Fallout 76, I guess it makes sense, right? Only 25 years have passed since the bombs dropped, and everyone is freshly getting out of the vault. But like in the Fallout TV show, it's been 219 years, and people are still living in Philly, where there's no electricity, there's no clean water, fucking it's lawlessness, and everyone is all dirty. Like, dude, come on. Everyone is just barely scraping by, even though the Great War was 10 generations ago. No one can go through their daily life without looking at it through the lens of, oh, we're living in an apocalypse, and it fucking sucks. Meanwhile, New Reno from Fallout 2 is only 500 miles away, and they have a completely stable society. In Fallout 3, there's people cooped up in a shanty town built around an atomic bomb. The restaurants are still selling scavenged food from a nearby grocery store that, even after 200 years, still hasn't ran out of food somehow. And there's no form of government or intermingling between any of these communities whatsoever. Fallout 4 is the same way, with Diamond City just being a cooler looking version of Megaton. Now, Diamond City has technology, obviously. I'm not saying that these cities don't have technology. It's just that there's no advancement beyond basic survival. Like I said, since Fallout 2, Fallout has been a post-apocalyptic game. There's really no reason why everyone should be living like their house got bombed yesterday. So, I mean, let's face it, Bethesda's Fallout, quite simply, is a cash cow. So they're adamant on keeping it as post-apocalyptic as possible, because they know that's what sells games, post-apocalyptic shooters. Oh, a city's getting too advanced? Oh, we'll just nuke it, because living in Fallout has to suck, and it always has to be post-apocalyptic, because if it's not Fallout. The sophisticated themes of rebuilding societies and political goings-on is traded in for just mindless first-person shooting. But, you know, as much as I hate to admit it, the game's fucking fun, man. I mean, it's just fun. Yeah, sure, we can tease them all they want for their reductionist view of the world. We can criticize them for their superficial understanding of the aesthetic, and we can make fun of Todd for all the it just works is and the 16 times the details. But let's face it, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 are great games. Games that I've put hundreds and hundreds of hours into. Games that are important enough for me to write videos about. Games that really capture the wonder and imagination of exploration that most other games can't even begin to capture. And above all else, games that are simply just fun to play. And at the end of the day, this is a video game. And fun is what matters most. As the first half of the video was said in all my rambling, Bethesda gets a lot wrong with the Fallout franchise. But that's not to say they're the worst company in the world to be handling this franchise, because they've done a ton of good. And in my opinion, they've done more good than bad for the franchise as a whole. For all the shit I give Bethesda for their shallow writing, they truly are a revolutionary game company. And without them, the franchise would not be as iconic as it is today. To put it simply, Bethesda sacrifices good writing and a coherent world theme for great gameplay mechanics, exceptional exploration, and environmental storytelling. Let's be honest, Bethesda's story writing has never been top-notch, frankly due to this goober right here. But they have perfected world building, and there's so many instances of just a building telling a story in itself. The feeling of Bethesda's Fallout in general is just unmatched. Bethesda has such a knack for making worlds that you actually want to go out and explore. Every little location or map marker on your Pip-Boy is like a little treasure in and of itself. Just a brand new location waiting for its secrets to be uncovered. It's the essence of discovery that really keeps you hooked onto Bethesda's games. And it seems like every time you boot up Fallout 3 or 4, you just find something new to discover. It's truly one of the only games where you can just pick a direction to run towards and get something interesting out of it. The lust for discovery is most prevalent in Fallout 3, where before you even boot up the game, your first thought process is, I gotta find the White House as soon as possible. And once you get out of that dark metro and you see the Washington Monument with a bunch of trenches dug into it and super mutants everywhere, it's truly enamoring. It ignites that fire in you to go out and waste 4 hours looking around for cool monuments and loot, simply because it's fun. That's the name of the game with Bethesda's Fallout. Pure and simple fun. At the end of the day, a great game only requires one thing: a great gameplay loop. No matter how you feel about the writing, the tone, the aesthetic, yada yada yada, you can't deny that Fallout 4 is easily the most fun Fallout game to play. I mean, in what other game can you pop on a 50s song, craft an insanely overpowered weapon, go to your nearest town and just start unloading on everyone, and then watching them explode with bottle caps?
12 seconds later.
And while the fun factor is always consistent, so too is the art direction of Bethesda's games. Now, look, I mean, I was just complaining about it. I don't particularly like the art direction that Bethesda has taken with Fallout, but at least Bethesda kind of has a consistent art direction on what they want all Fallouts to look like going forward. Because for better or worse, Bethesda is insanely protective of the Fallout IP, and they won't let anyone touch it if they feel like they're not going to handle it properly. Interplay kind of went with a scattershot approach to letting just anyone develop a Fallout game, and you kind of see how that turned out for him. We had the very poorly received Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, a lukewarm Fallout Tactics, and a cancelled MMO that was just destined to be bad. Bethesda took the IP, they melted it down to its very simplest forms: retro-futuristic 1950s, post-apocalyptic, first-person shooter RPG, and they completely revitalized the franchise because of it. Though it is reductive to the original vision of Fallout, you simply cannot deny the amount of success that they've had with it. And look, I threw around the phrase Bethesda doesn't understand Fallout a lot in this video, and while we can argue all day whether that's true or not, the fact of the matter is, Bethesda doesn't need to understand the original vision of Fallout, because Bethesda, at this point, is Fallout. Fallout was only with Interplay for 10 years. Bethesda has owned Fallout for 17 years. Fallout is now completely synonymous with Bethesda Game Studios, and BGS's DNA of game design is coursing through all of those games. So, you know, I can bitch and moan all day, we can all bitch and moan all day about how Bethesda ruined Fallout, but at the end of the day, there's been more games created, there's been more lore established, and frankly, there's been more care put into the IP than Interplay ever could have. The music of Fallout is what puts the cherry on top for all these games. When you think of the gameplay of Fallout, the two things you think of are post-apocalyptic and old music. And, you know, that wasn't really a thing until Fallout 3. Sure, Fallout 1 and 2 had an old song at the intro, but there was no actual licensed music in the Fallout games. There were original scores that sounded kind of tribalistic, had a lot of wind instruments, and overall just kind of had an ambient desert vibe to it. The introduction of licensed 1940s and 1950s doo-wop was revolutionary for the games. Not only did it fit in perfectly with the overarching 1950s aesthetic that we talked about earlier, but it is also a uniquely great contrast to how absolutely chaotic the games are at every single turn. Lastly, there are just too many SKUs of Fallout fans to please, so just like what you like, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's the OG CRPG Fallout fans that hate everything after 2. There's the old Bethesda truthers that hate everything after New Vegas. And there's the mass audience that loves 4 and 76 and won't play the old ones. This begs the question, what actually is Fallout? Not even its own fanbase can agree on what is and isn't Fallout. While we can all have our opinions for how Fallout should be, I think what really matters most is that the creator of Fallout likes Bethesda's vision. He sees the massive creative difference taken and accepts them for what they are. The series has changed in every way since its creation, and Tim Kaine has been nothing but supportive of Bethesda since then. So if the big daddy of Fallout is open to the evolution of the franchise, why can't we be? To me, it isn't really a conversation of how Bethesda has ruined Fallout, but rather how has Bethesda reinterpreted Fallout. They're going to get some things right, and they're going to get some things wrong. They're going to take liberties that other creators wouldn't, because that's just the creative process. Todd Howard isn't Josh Sawyer isn't Chris Avallone, and Chris Avallone isn't Tim Kaine. All of these people had different interpretations of what Fallout is. Some have ideas that are more closely aligned to the original vision, and others use their own ideas of a game design and apply it to the pre-established universe. Bethesda has certainly made some questionable decisions with games artistically, as well as breaking tons of established lore. But at least they're trying to respect it and are more protective of it. They could have easily wiped out everything pre-Fallout 3 and established their own universe. Yet they chose to acknowledge it and translate it from a top-down 2D art style to a 3D open world space, which sure as hell ain't easy to do. I don't look at it as categorically as pre-Bethesda and post-Bethesda games, but rather as a natural progression of the franchise and how it's been handled over 30 years. The natural progression for a franchise as big as Fallout is experimenting with new ideas and simplifying its mechanics and art style for newcomers. Surely the game couldn't have continued to be a CRPG with an art style more complicated than calculus and reached the level of success it's had in recent years. Resident Evil 4 made the hard switch from a fixed camera, tank controlled survival horror game to straight up third person shooter. And while a lot of people view Resident Evil 4 as ruining the franchise, even more people view it as the greatest game of all time. Fallout is one of the biggest games in the world right now. And as gamers in general, it doesn't hurt to be more receptive to changes and evolution. I for one hate change, but once you take a step back and take it in for all it is, you realize it ain't so bad. For all the shit I give Bethesda in part 1, I can confidently say that without them, I would have never known what Fallout is, and I would have never given it a shot. Because they took the chance on a dead franchise, completely transformed it into an entirely new game design while respecting established lore. It ended up being a franchise I know and love today. There's something so special about this franchise that has kept me and millions of others hooked on it for years. The future is certainly bright for Fallout. There will be an inevitable Fallout 5. The TV show looks like it'll have a nice long run. I for one am stoked for where the series is headed, and whatever comes out, I'll make sure to be there. Day one.